My first transfer. I was assigned to my hometown. Surprisingly, my new boss was an old childhood friend. My heart leaped at this reunion after so many years. Her smile was just as I remembered from those days. Seeing that smile even brought back my feelings of first love. But I knew the feelings she hid behind that smile. I'm Scott, 30 years old. After graduating from college, I was hired as a salesperson at a regular company. I managed to do fairly well in sales, and after 8 years, I received my first transfer order. When I heard where I was being transferred, I couldn't help but exclaim. It was a transfer to a branch near my hometown. I left home to go to college and started living alone in the next state over. I had never thought that I'd return home due to a transfer. The night the orders were issued, I immediately called my parents. They sounded happy to hear I was coming back. But they said, "There's no room for you, you know?" I was already aware of that. My parents had demolished our old, dilapidated house a few years ago and moved into an apartment for two. My much older brother had already settled down and built a house in our hometown at that time. When I told my parents that I planned to move into a bachelor apartment near the company, they laughed and said, "Bachelor, huh? It would have been great if you could bring a girlfriend home," they teased me. As usual, I replied, "I'm too busy with work to have time for a relationship," and hung up the phone. Seeing my brother leading a happy married life, I knew they wanted the same happiness for me. And then came my first day of transfer. There's no place like hometown. Just being in the place where I was born and raised, the air felt nostalgically fresh. It was my first time at the transferred company's office, and I looked around curiously as I walked through the building. As I wandered around the sales department floor, someone called out, "Are you Scott?" It was the sales department head, Tucker. I greeted Tucker there and we went into the sales department together. Tucker introduced me and turned to the manager, Mark, and the section chief, Ryan. And as he was introducing, "She is the supervisor," I was taken aback. "Jules." Even though Tucker was still talking, I accidentally exclaimed out loud. "Ah, sorry." I hastily covered my mouth. No wonder I was surprised. The sales department supervisor introduced was Julie, who was my childhood friend Jules. "It's been a while. I'm looking forward to working with you," Jules said with a smile, just as I remembered from long ago. Jules was 3 years older than me and had lived next door until I was in the first year of high school. She moved out to live on her own when she went to college. Since then, we only saw each other occasionally during summer vacations and Christmas. Now, neither of our homes were next to each other anymore. When I went off to college, our family home had to be demolished, and we moved out. The last time I saw Jules was right before we moved out when she had come home for a visit. It was truly a long-awaited reunion, but I recognized her at first glance. Filled with nostalgia and joy. I almost forgot I was at the company. Tucker's voice asking, "Do you know each other?" brought me back to reality. Still exhilarated, I briefly explained to Tucker that Jules was my childhood friend. Tucker was also surprised by such a coincidence. "Just make sure you don't get too casual. But I guess Julie will handle it fine." "I'm counting on you," he said. Tucker left me in Jules's care and then departed. I immediately got started on my work. For a while, Julie, would be working with me. First, she showed me around my desk area, the department, and we toured the different floors of the company. And in between moving around, we made some small talk. Jules laughed, remembering the moment we had first seen each other earlier. Jules had calmly greeted me with, "It's been a while," but internally, she was surprised. "I thought there might be someone with the same name, but I never imagined it would actually be you, Scott," she said. I need to be careful not to accidentally call her Jules. Even though we hadn't seen each other for a long time, I've been calling her Jules since before I could even remember. It's such a natural nickname that it just comes out. "Hey, how are your parents? Are they still living in the old house?" As I traced back through my childhood memories, the faces of Jules's parents suddenly came to mind. "Yeah," Jules replied, but her expression clouded over. "But my mom isn't around anymore. Now, it's just my dad living in that house," she said. I was shocked to hear that her mother had passed away. Because her mother, I remembered, was always so lively and full of energy. But I was somewhat relieved to hear that her father was doing well. Even though Jules and I are childhood friends, at the company, it's a supervisor-subordinate relationship. As a supervisor, Jules efficiently handles her work, and the term career woman suits her well. Yet, her caring demeanor and her bright smile when interacting with people haven't changed since those days. Though she seems even more radiant now than before. While I do respect her as a supervisor, I must admit, I feel a bit giddy because, honestly, Jules was my first love. Jules was adorable ever since she was a child. With a small face and big eyes, she was always smiling. Her smile, kind nature, and caring, sisterly demeanor made her popular with everyone, regardless of gender. That hasn't changed even now as an adult. It makes sense that she's in a leadership position. The only thing that has changed is that she has grown even more beautiful as an adult. The forgotten feelings of my first love were slightly tickled. It's rare not to be asked questions about whether was Julie always as beautiful by a colleague who learned she was my childhood friend. It seems Jules is quite popular among the male employees. I've even heard from long-term employees she's been popular since she joined the company. But apparently, winning Jules over has proven to be a tough challenge. She's so cute but seems to have no interest in men. Someone sighed after being turned down for a date on a weekend. Well, I'll keep this conversation a secret from Jules. I hadn't thought there were any bad rumors, but knowing she's well liked by everyone put me at ease. Then on one Monday, during the morning assembly, I noticed Jules was absent. When I checked with Tucker, he mentioned that she had called in just before work hours to say she was taking the day off due to severe dizziness. Worried, I sent her a message asking, "Are you okay?" Though she didn't reply immediately, she eventually responded with, "Yes, thank you." Still concerned, I called Jules after work. "Hello?" I heard Jules's faint voice on the other end. When I asked how are you feeling, she said she felt too ill to get up. Jules's apartment was near the company, just like mine. I knew it was within walking distance. I told her I'd bring some drinks and easy-to-eat snacks and asked for her apartment number before heading over immediately. When I arrived at the apartment and rang the intercom, there was no response, even after several attempts. Considering she had mentioned she couldn't get up, I thought she might be asleep, and was about to leave the items at the doorstep when a bad feeling stopped me. I tentatively tried the doorknob and found it unlocked. That's when I opened the door. "Jules!" I called out to her in a panic. She was leaning against the wall near the entrance, looking pale and in pain. After my call, she had managed to get to the door and unlock it. She said the dizziness started the night before. Suddenly, she had been struck by severe vertigo and collapsed. She thought it had subsided a bit, but she was still feeling dizzy. I tried to help Jules to her bed, but her complexion was so poor, and she was so weak that she could hardly walk. I immediately called an ambulance. I accompanied her to the hospital. After an examination, she was suspected of having Meniere's disease. Given her poor condition, Jules was admitted to the hospital for further tests. When it came time to fill out the hospital admission forms, they asked me to contact her family. But Jules said, I didn't want to worry my father, and asked me not to tell him. From her expression, I sensed there was a reason behind it, and when I asked, it seemed she also wanted to spare Uncle the trouble of coming to the hospital because he was currently having trouble with his legs. Thinking it would cause less worry if he heard from me rather than getting a call from the hospital, I contacted him myself. He was shaken to hear she was admitted, but was relieved when I told him I was with her. He seemed to already know that I had transferred to the same company as Jules and asked me please take care of various things, including work matters. Considering his physical condition, I told him I would do as much as I could and gave him my phone number to ensure he could contact me anytime. The next day, after work, I visited Jules, and her complexion looked better than the day before. She still didn't have the strength to sit up, but she felt a bit more settled. I wonder if Dad is okay. Despite her own discomfort, Jules was constantly worried about her father, wondering if he had eaten or how he was managing his laundry. Since I had heard about her father's bad leg the day before, and she was so worried about him, I asked, is he really in such a tough spot? Quietly, Jules said, yeah. And continued, I didn't want to worry him too much. As she explained the situation, her mother had passed away 4 years ago due to cancer. By the time it was discovered, it had already metastasized throughout her body, and rather than aggressive treatment, she chose palliative care. At the time, Jules had been appointed as a project leader and was on a long business trip out of state. When she learned of her illness, Jules had considered consulting with her company to return home. However, both of her parents opposed this. Because Jules had just been given her first opportunity to lead a project. "Your dream is also my dream," her mother had insisted strongly, so Jules decided against returning home. Towards the end, her father took a 2-month leave from work to care for her. Even so, Jules was able to be there at the end. She ended up taking about a week off, but the project leader role remained hers, and her supervisor covered for her during her absence. About a month later, the project ended. And Jules returned from her business trip, but then misfortune struck her father. He was working on site when he slipped and fell from a height, resulting in lasting damage to his leg. After losing his wife, he had been suffering from sleepless nights filled with deep sadness. With the fatigue from caring for his wife compounded by sleep deprivation, his attention wandered, leading to the accident. Jules blamed herself for pushing him too hard. This prompted Jules to help with household chores by visiting her father's home after work and on weekends. At one point, she even considered giving up living alone and moving back home. But her father, considering Jules's commute, opposed the idea. Ultimately, Jules continued to commute to her parents' home for these past 4 years. She was promoted to supervisor and took on new responsibilities as a project leader. Despite being busy and tired from work, Jules always put her father's needs before her own. Taking on her job, the household chores, and her father's care alone must have been incredibly hard. Continuing in this state to the point of exhaustion, it seems the stress led to her bouts of dizziness. I never would have guessed from Jules's usually bright smile that she was dealing with so much. I felt ashamed that, despite being childhood friends, I didn't really understand her struggles. At the same time, I realized I couldn't just leave things as they were. I needed to do something for both Jules and her father. I thought I needed to see her father as soon as possible. After leaving Jules's hospital room, I called him and arranged to visit him the next day. The following day, after work, I headed to his house. I had told him we'd have dinner together, so I asked in advance about his favorite dishes and picked up some takeout from a local deli. As soon as he saw me, he greeted me with a broad smile and said, "You've grown up so much." It had been decades since we last met face to face, and although I felt nostalgic entering the house where I used to play almost every day, it felt almost like coming home. While we nibbled on the foods, we chatted about various things. But the conversation soon turned to Jules. I wonder if I pushed her too hard. He was blaming himself, too. He talked about how Jules had always been a kind and hardworking child and that hadn't changed, especially after her mother's death. She had been even more concerned about him. Despite knowing he shouldn't rely too much on her kindness. He admitted that he might have been leaning on her a bit too much since he was happy about her visits. He hadn't expected to feel so weakened by his wife's passing and felt pathetic for it, he said with a slump in his shoulders. He's a very kind-hearted man. As a child, when my parents were busy, he would play games with us or take Jules and me on day trips. While it might sound overstated to say I wanted to repay a kindness, I did want to help him feel better, even just a little. As I was thinking about how to brighten the conversation, I remembered that we used to play chess together. "Didn't you like playing chess?" I asked. His eyes lit up as he responded, "Oh. How about a game for old time's sake?" We then set up a game of chess. Although he mentioned it had been a while, he was still quite skilled, and I struggled to keep up. I lost quite easily. During the game, we talked about hobbies. And when he learned that my current hobby was fishing, he reminisced, "I used to fish a lot before I had a family," and mentioned wanting to try it again. Since his injury, he hadn't been out much. Maybe going fishing could lift his spirits a bit. "Let's go together once Jules is out of the hospital and feeling better," I suggested, making plans to go fishing with him. Jules's diagnostic stay in the hospital lasted a week. Thankfully, no diseases other than Meniere's disease were found. And she was advised not to overdo it upon discharge. Jules, more concerned about her father than herself, visited her home immediately after being discharged. Knowing she was going to visit, I offered to drive her and take the opportunity to see her father too. As soon as Jules and her father saw each other, they said "I'm sorry," truly showing how much they cared for each other. "I brought this for you." Hoping to change the atmosphere a bit, I spoke up. "Oh. Thank you, is it alright to bring 3 books? Jules leaned in to take a closer look at the books. Ha! A special feature on sea fishing? Books about fishing? We're planning to go fishing sometime, Scott and I, he responded. Hearing this, Jules exclaimed in surprise, when did you two get so close? In fact, besides the day we had reunited after a long time, I had visited him 2 more times. Jules knew I had been dropping off food for him, but she had no idea we had become close enough to make plans to hang out together. Can we match up again today? I hate to keep losing, I joked. Sure, but I won't go easy on you, he replied with a chuckle. No, please go easy on me. I laughed. He seemed quietly pleased as he pulled out the chessboard. He looks happy. He finally smiled. Jules muttered under her breath, almost to herself. I glanced over at Jules and saw her smiling through tears. From then on, I made up excuses about wanting to play chess or talk about fishing to visit her father. It wasn't that I felt obligated. I genuinely enjoyed having a hobby partner. When we met on weekends, I would invite his father to go shopping with me, helping him buy household necessities and stock up on groceries for several days. No matter where we went, we always ended up talking about our hobbies, and it was simply a lot of fun. Hey, it seems like you two are going out together every week, doesn't it? Jules asked with a smile during a lunch break at work. Look at this. Jules showed me the messages she exchanged with her father and teased, you guys went out last week and the week before that too, didn't you? We just click, we have a great time. I explained, and Jules chuckled softly. Hey Scott, thank you. What's this all of a sudden? I felt a bit embarrassed. Well, just being next to Jules made my heart race anyway. Though she was my first love, the feelings I held as a child were clearly different now. Beyond simply liking her, I naturally developed a desire to make her happy. I wanted to protect Jules's smile. What's this? Both of you coming together is quite rare. One Sunday when Jules and I went to visit him. We have something to tell you. I've started dating Julie, and I wanted to ask for your permission. As I solemnly began to speak, both Jules and her father suddenly burst into laughter with a chuckle in the middle of my speech. Apparently, as they heard me formally address her as Julie, it hit a funny nerve, and they both burst into laughter. There's no need for permission, Scott. I'd be happy. You're like a friend or even a son to me already, he said, making me feel relieved. I had approached Jules with the intention of marriage in mind. When she said yes, I was overjoyed. It turns out Jules had always seen me as something like a younger brother. But one day, seeing me having a great time talking with her father, she suddenly thought, I might marry this man. A few days later, I confessed my feelings to her. Life is full of surprises, Jules said with a laugh. 5 years later. Now, I no longer call her by Jules, but simply as Julie. And her father is now my father-in-law. And now we're living happily and noisily as a family of 5, with our 2-year-old son and our newborn daughter. A year after my confession, we got married. With the marriage, we decided to live together in Julie's family home. This cohabitation was actually encouraged by my own family as well. When I was seriously considering marriage, I realized my own dependence. The idea of becoming a son-in-law and living with my wife's family seemed natural because my much older brother had always taken care of our parents and had told me from a young age that he would handle everything. When I decided to become a family with Julie and my father-in-law, I felt not only joy but also a sense of responsibility. It was a commitment I decided I would uphold. I realized then that my brother had been carrying this responsibility all along. In the house my brother built, there are rooms prepared for our parents, anticipating that they might live there someday. I ask you to take good care of them, I said in front of my parents and brother. Leave them to me. My brother replied, tapping me on the shoulder. Scott has really grown up. Take good care of Julie and your father-in-law. Cherish them. My family responded. It was with their support that I was able to commit to making Julie and my father-in-law happy. I'll never forget this feeling. I will always protect the laughter of our children, and the smiles of Julie and my father-in-law.